Morning folks, I hope this isn't too windy. Today's June 12th, 2018. I'm out next to the West Garden. You may be able to hear the irrigation system that I've got going on right now. What it is a little tripod mounted sprinklers. We're doing overhead watering at this point during the first couple of weeks of this garden. It'll probably get switched over to the drip irrigation once we get there. Today I thought I'd take a moment and try and answer one of the questions that I had recently. Actually, it's a pair of questions from Lisa. With respect to other questions, I'm going to get to them eventually and all, but I wanted to at least address this question because it's timely as the leeks are growing over time. And Lisa had basically a two-part question, as I recall. I should have checked the computer before I came out here this morning. But the first part of her question was she had difficulty understanding why I'm not backfilling the holes once I plant the leek plants. And I'll put a link in the upper right-hand corner to the leek video doing the transplants of the leek plants. So we make these very deep holes, over 10 inches deep, and we grow our leek seedlings without pruning them. We aren't giving them haircuts like many folks do the onions and the leeks. I just don't do that. So we get these real tall seedlings and we make really deep holes and we put them into the soil. Now I'm going to go over there, I'm going to turn off the overhead irrigation and continue over there. Okay, just a quick review. This is a dibbler that I made a couple of years ago when I first learned about this system from J.M. Fortier, the Market Gardener, which is a really good book, and I'll put a link in the description below for his book. But I fabricated this, and this really, we're using this right now just to mark our spacing so that we get appropriate spacing for our leek plants. Now these are about 9 inches on center, so they're 9 inches apart, so they're spaced so that the rows are each 9 inches apart. The dibbler itself was made 10 inches so that this goes down deep enough into the soil, and I'm going to be modifying this system ultimately in the future. But this cap ends up, once we make the dibble, it starts pulling up the soil from the depths of the soil and depositing it back in the hole and making the hole less than 10 inches deep. Now we grow our seedlings 12, 14, 16 inches long. So what I do after I mark the spots is I sink it in about 14, 15 inches. We get to the round part. You'll see the moisture level in that video. I'm going all the way up to here. And this is not the ideal shape either. We'd want it to come to a point in the center of the bar because this will make the bar drift towards this wedge, go in that direction. So when we make these holes all the way down, let's say 14, 15 inches deep, some of the soil is going to backfill in there, but it's going to be very nice and loose soil. Really easy for the base of the leeks, the root parts, to actually sink down into the depths of the soil. Now Lisa asked, why in heck are you not backfilling the actual leek seedlings, the hole, once you plant the seedlings in there? Let's go over to the spot. All right, hopefully this is going to show up. You could see that they're getting filled in to various depths by the overhead sprinkler, and I'll review a bit about the overhead sprinkler in a moment. Just want to make sure this is in focus, seeing down here. However, with them being in the hole, and they're different size plants, so this one was probably a 16, 18 inch plant, this one here that I'm touching right here. And this one probably only was maybe 11 inches tall. And but you see how far down, I don't know how far you could see, I can get probably almost 4 inches before it gets there. That leaves a lot of the leaf surface, the green part that's necessary for doing photosynthesis, available. And as the sun passes over, right now it's still morning, so it's getting a lot of shadow from the hole, but as the sun passes overhead, that whole photosynthetic engine, if you will, that green material, the chlorophyll in the plant itself, is going to be producing the sugars necessary to feed the other microorganisms around the base. And gradually, as that plant starts to grow with the overhead watering system, these holes gradually get filled in bit by bit. And as the earthworms move their way along as well. Now some of the birds will come down and they'll chop off some of the tops of these plants. So another part to this question is why we're using the overhead irrigation. Now it's multifactorial, but there's a couple of elements that are really important. With respect to the leek plants, with the overhead irrigation, the droplets coming down from overhead simulate what rainfall is like, and that will create an erosive effect, and that's going to cause erosion, not erosive, erosion type effect. And that's going to cause the soil from the margins of the leek plant to gradually weep their way down in around the root mass. As that leek plant continues to grow, there's going to be more of, I'm going to call it the bulb or the delicious part of the leek, that white part. And there's going to be less of the sand or dirt filling in between the leaves. We have less of that as a result of the way that we're doing it. Now once the leek plants get to after a couple weeks from now, putting a drip irrigation system would work just fantastic. So I may end up doing that. We'll have to see how things work out. There's another reason why we're using the drip irrigation in this area though as well. You may recall from that video that 2 of the beds are corn, and the third one here, before we get to the leeks, are carrots. Carrots, their germination is really dependent on the warmth and certainly the moisture content. Having that surface of that soil bed nice and moist really enhances our chances of excellent germination. So we'll see just how well this works out. Now one key thing is I really do want to keep the surface of the soil nice and moist. That's also going to encourage the weed seedlings, the weed seeds, to germinate as well. So I'll take the flame weeder and go over this within the next couple of days, but I want the soil bed to be dry when I do weeding, even when I'm doing flame weeding and all. But as a general rule, the recommendation when you're doing weeding, especially with a stirp hoe or hand cultivator, you want the soil surface to be dry so that the weed becomes desiccated, dried out, so that it can no longer be viable and sustain its own life. So that's important. So I hope I answered that first part of the question. The second part of the question is, as you can see from our videos, we have lots of cats, and we're wildlife enthusiasts, we're nature enthusiasts, and so it's always a battle trying to keep the cats out of the garden beds, and it's a battle we can't win. Now with this kennel panels that you see around me right here, this works pretty darn well, and with the type of gates that we're using down below, as long as they go down low to the ground, I'm not sure if you could see them back there, the cats really don't get in. But cats can get into just about any place. Cats are like raccoons. They can scale tall buildings and get into just about any place that they want to. They want to go in to the garden beds because of shade. They love getting underneath the plants. They love hunting for the voles underneath the weed mats as well. But when you have non-covered, in other words, no weed mat, no heavy mulch systems on these garden beds, I think it's really important to try and keep the cats from using it as a litter box. Now, I posted other videos about how we also compost our litter, and we do it in an appropriate and safe manner that we don't have to worry about pathogens or GMO products in the materials that we're using. And I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner. I've got to try to remember to do that. So it's important to try and keep the cats out of the beds that aren't covered by weed mats, because the cats, this is beautiful soil. What's one way of keeping them out of it? Weed mats. What's another way? Making the soil wet. If the soil surface is constantly wet, the cats aren't going to go to it. They're very picky. They'll go to the wood chips before they go to that area. So let's go over to another area where we're using a lot of drip irrigation as well. Okay, so Lisa, I'm over here in the eastern garden area, the entrance to one of the entrances to the eastern garden. And the gate behind me, the wide gate, the 12-footer there, is a good design gate to keep the cats out because it's like a wire type fabric that has small enough holes that the cats can't get through. But they can go underneath it and the cats can jump over it or jump through it at the upper level. The other gate there, they can squeeze through all sorts of places. The Premier One fencing that I have right here, the hole size is large enough that a chicken and a cat can get through them, and we don't use electrification with our electric fencing here. And then the Premier One fencing that we have around the central garden, the holes are much larger, made for sheep, and therefore chickens and cats can go right, I'm sorry, this is made for chickens, the one over here, and it's much more difficult. The chickens and the cats can't get through it. But if it's electrified and they smarten up, they can just push up the fence and scoot underneath it. So let's go into the eastern garden here. I'll show you where we've got the onions planted. Okay, I'm over here in the eastern garden. This is a partially shaded garden. This is the area where we've got the broccoli, the cauliflower, and the red cabbage planted right behind me here. And we have a really nice bed of carrots started over here as well. And we don't use excuse me, those are onions that are planted here. Carrots were there last year. So the onions, we decided to have these rows pretty close together, and I'll be hand cultivating these ones. So as the weeds pop up, I'll be using a hand cultivator, probably the collinear cultivator or the narrow strap hoe. And that's how I'll be weeding this. But for right now, that soil being exposed, the cats are going to want to use that as a litter box. So I put some equine fencing, some short equine fencing up behind me here, and I just used T-posts to support it and some wire ties to hold it, and that keeps the cats out of this bed. The cats love being in a bed like this. Once these plants get larger and they get the larger leaves, the cats are underneath them all day long. And the second thing is they're hunting for the voles that are consuming the plants from underneath the mats. So you'll see them hunting and staring at the weed mats and then pawing at them, and they wait patiently until the vole gets over to the edge, and then they get the vole. And they get some mice as well. And the white-footed mice in this area is one of the determinate host for one of the ticks that we have around here that carries Lyme disease. So the cats do a really good job of keeping that population down as well. So yes, exposed soil can be an invitation for cats to use it as a litter box, and that's something to be mindful about with your garden design. Hopefully, when things calm down, I'm going to go over a list of things that I think are really important considerations when you're setting up your garden. Things that I've learned the hard way or I've learned from others as well. So I hope this answered your questions, Lisa. If I didn't answer them adequately, please leave another question or comment with clarification so I can do a better job next time. So this is another episode of Ask Me Anything. I hope it was of value. Please give it a thumbs up if you think it was of value. Share it with your friends. And certainly hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when we post more videos. And by all means, have a fantastic day. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye now.